My son stopped his own wedding to hand me a crumpled note that said just two words: "Papa, help me." I didn't hesitate. I stood up and told the sheriff to arrest the bride. But the wildest part? I had been waiting for this moment for 3 months. My future daughter-in-law, Sophie, had a strange obsession. It wasn't with my son Matthew. It was with my dirt. Every time she visited our ranch in North Carolina, she wouldn't look at the sunset. She'd stare at the fence line and ask, "Dominic, is this full 250 acres zoned for commercial development?" Before we continue Dominic's story, if you're listening right now, please help me prove a point. My family told me that storytelling is a dying art and that I'd never reach 1,000 subscribers telling stories like this. But I believe stories about justice and truth still matter. If you agree, hit that subscribe button right now, drop a comment telling me exactly where you're watching from in the world, and like this video, let's show them that real stories still have a home. Thank you. Let's get back to Dom's nightmare. She saw my rusted pickup truck and my worn-out boots and assumed I was just a tired old farmer sitting on land I couldn't afford. She thought I was land rich but cash poor. What she didn't know? I'm a retired structural engineer with industrial patents worth millions. This dirt isn't just a farm. It's a portfolio worth $5 million. I've spent 40 years analyzing structural stress, and Sophie was showing hairline cracks. But Matthew was blind with love. How could I tell my son that the woman he was about to marry was actually a black widow, plotting to put me in a nursing home and liquidate my estate? I needed hard proof. So I hired a private investigator. What he found was so dark, I almost canceled the wedding myself, but I knew Matthew had to see her mask slip with his own eyes to believe it. I just didn't expect him to find out at the altar. Most prospective daughters-in-law bring a bottle of wine or a dessert when they visit the family home. Sophie brought a calculator behind her eyes. I was under the hood of my rusted 2004 Silverado, wiping heavy grease onto a rag that had seen better decades when I felt her shadow fall over me. It wasn't a warm shadow. She didn't ask if I needed help or where my son Matthew was. She didn't comment on the beautiful North Carolina autumn leaves. Instead, she pointed a manicured finger toward the south ridge of my property, her gaze sharp and hungry. "Dominic," she said, her voice dripping with a sweetness that didn't reach her eyes. I was checking the county maps online again. "Are you absolutely certain the deed restricts subdivision on those 50 acres by the creek? It seems like such a waste of prime development space." That was the third time in 2 weeks. A normal fiancé asks about baby photos or family recipes to bond with the father-in-law. Sophie asked about zoning laws, property tax, brackets, and easement rights. I looked at her, really looked at her, and I felt that cold, warning prickle on the back of my neck that I hadn't felt since my days inspecting high-stress steel cables on suspension bridges. She saw an old man in a flannel shirt, stained with motor oil, living in a drafty farmhouse that hadn't been painted since the 90s. She saw the peeling wallpaper in the hallway and the duct tape holding the sole of my work boot together, and she did the math. To her, I was land rich and cash poor, a stubborn old mule sitting on a gold mine I was too stupid to excavate. God, she couldn't have been more wrong. It was almost laughable. What Sophie didn't know, what even my own son didn't fully grasp, was that I wasn't fixing my own truck because I couldn't afford a mechanic. I did it because I liked the silence of the work. She didn't know that inside the dusty, unassuming floor safe in my office were active patent documents for industrial vibration dampeners used in skyscrapers all over Tokyo and New York. Those useless engineering papers generated more passive income in a month than she likely made in 5 years. This 250-acre ranch wasn't my financial lifeline. It was my playground, bought with cash a decade ago. But as she stared out at the horizon, mentally paving over my tree line with condos, I realized she wasn't looking for a home with Matthew. She was looking for a liquidation sale, and she clearly thought I was the only thing standing in her way. I felt like a traitor, dialing the number, but my gut was screaming louder than my conscience. It took 3 rings for Alan, my attorney and oldest friend, to pick up, and even fewer words for me to ask him to do the unthinkable: dig into the past of the woman my son was planning to marry. I wanted to be wrong. I wanted Alan to call me back and tell me Sophie was exactly who she claimed to be: a struggling interior designer from Ohio with a clean slate and a big heart. But when I walked into Alan's office 2 days later, the look on his face told me that my checkbook wasn't the only thing in danger. There was a thick manila folder sitting in the center of his mahogany desk, and it looked heavy enough to crush my son's future. Alan didn't offer me a drink. He just slid the file across the polished wood. "Dominic," he said, his voice low and serious, "you need to sit down." I opened the folder, and the first thing I saw wasn't a criminal record, but a wedding photo. It was Sophie, looking radiant in white, clinging to the arm of a man who looked vaguely familiar. It wasn't Matthew. The date stamped on the photo was only 4 years ago. Beneath it was another photo, different groom, different state, same blushing bride. "Sophie isn't just unlucky in love," Alan explained, tapping a spreadsheet that detailed court filings from Florida and Washington state. "She's a professional widow, minus the death certificate. She specializes in the quiet divorce." I read, through the summary, my blood turning to ice. 2 marriages in 7 years. Both targets were the only sons of wealthy, low-profile families. Both marriages lasted less than 24 months, just long enough to bypass annulment laws, but short enough to avoid raising too many eyebrows. In both cases, she claimed emotional distress or neglect, threatened public scandals, and walked away with settlements totaling nearly $3 million. She was a shark who fed on inheritance. The pattern was terrifyingly precise. She targeted men who were soft-hearted, slightly naive, and attached to family assets they didn't control yet. Men exactly like Matthew. I closed the folder, feeling a wave of nausea. She hadn't stumbled upon our ranch by accident. She hadn't fallen for Matthew's crooked smile or his kindness. She had scouted us. She had likely looked up my patent filings, estimated the value of the land, and realized that Matthew was the key to the vault. My son wasn't finding a life partner. He was being groomed as the unsuspecting accomplice in the robbery of his own birthright. The trap didn't snap shut with a bang. It closed with a soft, innocent rustle of legal paper sliding across my kitchen table. Sophie sat next to Matthew, her hand resting protectively over his, looking at me with an expression of practiced concern that made my stomach turn. "Dominic," she said softly, pushing a thick stack of documents toward my coffee mug, "we need to talk about the future. Matthew and I are just so worried about you living out here all alone, especially with the episodes. I want to see where the real ones are watching from." Sophie thought money was the only thing that made a person valuable, but we know better. If you value loyalty over cash, drop a heart in the comments and tell me exactly what city you represent. Let's flood the comments and show the algorithm that good people are watching from everywhere. I looked at my son, and the pain in his eyes was genuine. Sophie had been busy. For weeks, she had been moving my keys, leaving the gas stove burner on after I'd left the room, and unlocking the back gate at night to let the livestock wander. She was gaslighting me, methodically painting a picture of a senile old man losing his grip on reality. "Dad," Matthew said, his voice cracking. "Sophie found the truck keys in the refrigerator again. You can't keep saying you didn't put them there. It's dangerous." He didn't know she had planted them. He only saw a father who was fading away and a fiancée who was stepping up to save the family. "I found this wonderful facility," Sophie interrupted, sliding a glossy brochure for Oak Bridge Assisted Living on top of the legal stack. It was a high-end warehouse for the unwanted elderly. "And these papers," she tapped the document titled Durable Power of Attorney, "just allow us to manage the ranch's finances so you don't have to stress about taxes or maintenance. We can sell off the unused acreage to pay for your care. It's the responsible thing to do." I felt a surge of rage so hot it almost broke my cover. She wasn't just stealing my money, she was trying to steal my dignity and my freedom. She wanted to lock me away in a room with rubberized floors while she liquidated 40 years of my hard work. But I knew if I yelled, if I threw her out, I would only prove her point, that I was erratic, aggressive, and mentally unfit. I had to be smarter. I had to become the character she wrote for me. I let my shoulders slump and deliberately allowed a tremor to shake my right hand as I reached for my reading glasses. I don't remember the refrigerator," I stammered, making my voice sound thin and confused. I avoided eye contact, staring blankly at the table. "Did I really do that, son?" I saw a flash of triumph in Sophie's eyes, quick and sharp as a viper strike. She thought she had won. "It's okay, Dominic," she cooed, pushing a pen into my shaking hand. "Just sign here, and we'll take care of everything." I held the pen, hovering over the signature line, acting as if I couldn't focus. "I'm so tired," I whispered, pushing the paper away just an inch. "I need to sleep on it. My eyes aren't working right." I wasn't signing my life away. I was buying time to sharpen the axe. I never thought I'd be the kind of man to bug his own home, but survival makes you do strange things. The day after Sophie tried to coerce my signature, I called the private investigator back, not for background checks this time, but for equipment. By noon, while Sophie and Matthew were out tasting wedding cakes, we had installed tiny, high-fidelity microphones in the living room, the kitchen, and most importantly, the guest cottage where Sophie's long-lost brother, Marcus, was staying. Marcus had arrived 3 days ago, a complete stranger to us both, supposedly to help with wedding prep. He was a slick, greasy character who looked at my ranch with the same hungry calculation as Sophie. I had a hunch blood wasn't the only thing they shared. I spent the next 2 nights sitting in my darkened office with headphones on, listening to the mundane sounds of my house. The refrigerator humming, the floorboards creaking, Matthew laughing at something on TV. I was starting to feel like a paranoid old fool, wondering if I had misjudged everything. Then, on the 3rd night, the audio feed from the guest cottage crackled to life. It was late, past midnight. Sophie's voice cut through the static, sharp and devoid of the honeyed tone she used with my son. "He's stalling, Marcus. The old bat is more stubborn than I thought. He played the confused card perfectly, but he didn't sign." My heart hammered against my ribs. I turned up the volume, my hand trembling over the record button. Marcus laughed, a low, nasty sound. "Relax, babe. We don't need him to sign. I already practiced his signature. I forged the power of attorney documents this morning while they were at the caterer's. It looks perfect." I froze. The cold reality of their malice washed over me. "Good," Sophie snapped. "File it the moment we say I do. Once I'm legally his next of kin via marriage and that document is filed, we commit the father for dementia immediately. We sell the land to the developer by Christmas. We're looking at $5 million. Easy. Then we dump the son and disappear to Rio." There it was, the smoking gun. Not just a plan, but a confession of active forgery. Dump the son. Hearing her say that, dismissing my kind, trusting boy like he was garbage, hurt more than the threat against my own life. She wasn't just a con artist, she was a criminal. I saved the file, backed it up to 3 different cloud servers, and took off the headphones. The silence in the room was heavy, but the confusion was gone. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was a hunter who had just found the trail. The recording burned a hole in my pocket, a digital weapon, heavy enough to end the war instantly. My first instinct was to kick down Matthew's bedroom door, play the audio, and watch him throw Sophie out into the dirt where she belonged. But as I watched them at breakfast the next morning, I hesitated. Matthew was looking at her with an adoration that was painful to witness. He was fixing a loose button on her coat, his hands gentle, his face glowing with the promise of a future he thought was real. If I played that tape now, in the privacy of our kitchen, Sophie would spin it. She was a master manipulator. She'd claim it was a joke, a deepfake, or worse, she'd claim I had doctored it in my dementia-riddled state. I realized with a sinking heart that the truth wasn't enough. Matthew didn't just need to hear it. He needed to be shocked out of his trance. He needed to see her cornered. If I told him now, I risked him choosing her over me. Love is blind, but betrayal is blinding. I couldn't risk losing my son to his own denial. I had to let him walk to the edge of the cliff so I could pull him back at the very last second. It was a cruel strategy, and I hated myself for it, but I was playing for his life. So I made the hardest decision a father can make. I decided to wait. I decided to let the wedding proceed. I spent the next 48 hours in a fever of secret preparations. I wasn't planning a reception. I was planning a sting operation. I met with the county sheriff, an old fishing buddy of mine, at a diner 2 towns over. I played him the tape, specifically the part about the forgery. His jaw tightened, and by the time Sophie's voice said, "Sell the land," he was already putting on his hat. "I'll have a cruiser parked behind the barn," he promised. Next, I called the videographer. I doubled his fee in cash to ensure that when I gave the signal, the cameras wouldn't cut away to the flowers. They would zoom in on the bride's face. The night before the wedding, I sat on my porch, watching the workers set up the white folding chairs on the lawn. It looked like a celebration, but to me, it looked like a courtroom. I felt a deep, aching sorrow for Matthew. Tomorrow was supposed to be the happiest day of his life, and I was orchestrating its destruction. I was going to break his heart to save his future. I just prayed that when the dust settled, He would understand why I let it go this far. The morning sun hit the North Carolina hills with a golden brilliance that felt mocking. It was a perfect day for a wedding, the kind brides pray for, clear blue skies, a gentle breeze rustling the turning leaves, and the scent of pine in the air. But as I buttoned my tuxedo, my hands were cold as ice. The ranch was buzzing with activity. Florists were draping garlands over the gazebo, musicians were tuning their strings, and guests were arriving in a stream of polished cars, unaware they were walking into a crime scene. I stood at my bedroom window, watching Sophie down below. She was directing the caterers with military precision, laughing that fake, glittering laugh. She looked like a princess. She was a viper in silk. When I finally went downstairs, the tension in my chest was so tight I could barely breathe. I had the sheriff on speed dial in my pocket and the smoking gun audio file queued up on my phone, connected via Bluetooth to the main sound system. I was ready to ruin everything. I was ready to be the villain in the eyes of every guest, as long as it saved my boy. But when I saw Matthew, my plan faltered. He was standing near the altar, waiting for the procession to start, and he looked wrong. He wasn't nervous excited. He was pale, almost gray. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool breeze. He kept checking his inner jacket pocket, patting it over and over again, like he was making sure his heart was still there. He didn't look like a groom. He looked like a man marching to the gallows. I tried to catch his eye, to give him a reassuring nod, but he wouldn't look at me. His jaw was locked tight. Had he sensed something? Or was this just pre-wedding jitters magnified by the toxic woman he was about to marry? The music swelled, Pachelbel's canon, classic and cloying. The guests stood up. Sophie appeared at the end of the aisle, a vision in expensive lace, paid for by the credit cards she had opened in Matthew's name. She floated toward us, smiling that predatory smile, her eyes locked not on Matthew, but on the house behind him, her prize. My thumb hovered over my phone screen. Wait for the vows, I told myself. Let her think she's won. As she reached the altar and took Matthew's trembling hand, the silence of the crowd was heavy. The officiant began to speak, droning on about love and trust. I took a step forward, my heart hammering against my ribs, ready to shout, ready to stop the madness. But then Matthew moved. He didn't look at Sophie. He turned, slowly, painfully, and looked directly at me. The officiant asked, "Who gives this woman to be married?" But the answer was a silence so loud it rang in my ears. I was about to step forward to play the audio that would burn Sophie's world to the ground, when Matthew beat me to it. He didn't answer the priest. He didn't look at his bride. Instead, with a hand that shook violently, he reached into the inner pocket of his tuxedo jacket. He pulled out a small folded scrap of paper. It was crumpled, as if he had been squeezing it for an hour, praying for courage. He stepped off the altar, bypassing Sophie entirely, and walked straight to me in the front row. The guests gasped, a ripple of confusion moving through the lawn. Sophie's smile faltered, replaced by a sharp, confused glare. "Matthew," she hissed, "what are you doing?" He ignored her. He pressed the note into my hand, his eyes wet and terrified, like he was 6 years old again and waking up from a nightmare. I looked down. 2 words, scrawled in shaky ink. "Papa, help me." My heart stopped. I looked up at him, and he whispered, barely audible, "I heard them. Last night. Marcus caught me listening. He said he'd kill you if I didn't go through with it." The realization hit me like a physical blow. I wasn't the only one who knew. My boy had gone to find his bride the night before, and he had walked into the trap. He wasn't just silent out of fear of heartbreak. He was a hostage in his own wedding. Marcus, sitting in the third row, shifted in his seat, his eyes narrowing as he saw Matthew break script. I didn't need the recording anymore. I needed to be a father. I stood up, unfolding to my full height, the engineer in me replaced by a protective bear. I turned to the crowd, then to the sheriff standing in the back shadow of the oak tree. "Sheriff!" I bellowed, my voice cracking across the silent garden. "Arrest this woman and grab the man in the third row." There are thousands of Sophies out there right now, preying on good families because they think no one is watching. Help me expose the red flags. Hit the subscribe button and like button too, so we push this video out to someone who might need to hear it, and share this with a friend you'd trust with your life. Let's protect our own. Sophie let out a screech that sounded more animal than human. "You crazy old man!" she screamed, lunging toward us, her veil tearing as she stumbled. "He's senile. Don't listen to him. Matthew, tell them." "I'm not senile, Sophie," I said, my voice dropping to a deadly calm as I stepped between her and my son. "And Matthew isn't an idiot. We know about the forged power of attorney. We know about the nursing home. We know about Rio." The color drained from her face so fast she looked like a corpse. She looked at Marcus, but the brother was already bolting toward the parking lot, straight into the arms of a waiting deputy. Sophie froze, trapped in her expensive white dress, as the wail of sirens began to rise from the driveway. The wedding was over. The rescue had begun. The sound of handcuffs clicking shut is usually cold and mechanical, but in that garden, under the midday sun, it sounded like freedom. Sophie didn't go quietly. She was screaming obscenities that would make a sailor blush, thrashing against the deputies as they guided her into the back of a cruiser. The guests, stunned and murmuring, scattered like startled birds, leaving behind empty white chairs and a wedding cake that would never be cut. It was a chaotic, beautiful disaster. I watched the last car pull away, the dust settling on the driveway, before I finally turned to find Matthew. He was sitting on the steps of the front porch, his tuxedo jacket discarded on the grass, his head buried in his hands. He looked smaller than I had seen him in years, crushed by the weight of a betrayal he was still trying to comprehend. I sat down beside him, the old wood of the porch creaking under our weight. For a long time, neither of us said a word. We just listened to the wind in the trees, the same wind that had blown through this valley since before Sophie was born and would keep blowing long after she was forgotten. "I thought I was going to die up there," Matthew finally whispered, not looking up. "I went to the cottage to give her the necklace, and I heard her laughing. Then Marcus came out. He saw me. He told me if I didn't say, 'I do,' and sign the marriage license, he'd burn the barn down with you sleeping in the loft." He lifted his head, tears streaking his face. "I didn't know what to do, Dad. I wrote the note in the bathroom this morning, hoping I could slip it to you before the vows. It was the only way I could think to warn you without Marcus seeing." I put my arm around his shoulders, pulling him into a rough embrace. "You did good, son," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "You were brave, but you didn't need to warn me." "I knew, Matt. I knew for days." He pulled back, shocked. "You knew?" "I had a recording," I admitted. "I was going to play it at the altar. I almost told you a dozen times, but I was terrified that if I just told you, you wouldn't believe me. I had no idea Marcus had threatened you. I'm so sorry I waited." Matthew looked at the empty driveway where the police car had disappeared. "It doesn't matter now," he said quietly. "She's gone. I loved who I thought she was, but that person never existed." We sat there as the sun began to dip, two men who had almost lost everything, realizing that the only thing that really mattered was sitting right there on the porch steps. We had our land, we had our freedom, and most importantly, we had the truth. The silence on the porch was comfortable now, but a question hung in the air, heavy and inevitable. Matthew picked at a loose thread on his tuxedo pants, staring out at the rolling hills of our property. "Dad," he started, his voice hesitant. "When she was screaming, she said something about $5 million. She said you were sitting on a gold mine. Was that just was that just her craziness talking?" I took a deep breath. This was the final wall between us, the last secret I had kept to protect him. "No," I said softly. "That part wasn't crazy. That was the only honest thing she said all day." Matthew turned to me, his eyes wide. "What?" I leaned back, looking at the rusted roof of my pickup truck parked in the driveway. "I never told you because I wanted you to build your own life, Matt. I wanted you to value work, not just what you could buy. But those patents I worked on in the 90s, the vibration dampeners, they never stopped earning. And this land, I bought it when nobody wanted it, but the rezoning maps changed last year. With the patents and the land combined, we're sitting on about $8 million in assets, give or take." Matthew looked like I had just told him I was an alien. "8 million?" he whispered. "Dad, you drive a truck with a taped-up window. You argue with the cashier about the price of eggs. Because money is for security, not for show," I told him, looking him dead in the eye. "It's a shield, Matthew, not a sword. It's there so that if you ever get sick or if the roof caves in, we're okay. It's not there so we can buy things we don't need to impress people we don't like. Sophie saw the money as a way out. I see it as a way to stay right here." He looked out at the land again, seeing it differently this time. Not just as home, but as a fortress that had almost been breached. "She almost took it all," he murmured. "She took nothing," I corrected him, "because we have each other, and that's the one thing she couldn't calculate." 6 months later, the gavel came down in a courtroom 3 counties over. Sophie and Marcus accepted a plea deal for conspiracy, forgery, and extortion. They'd be spending the next 5 years in a place with very high fences and no view. I didn't go to the sentencing. Neither did Matthew. We were too busy. We spent that afternoon tearing down the old guest cottage where they had plotted our ruin. It felt good to swing the sledgehammers, to watch the rotten wood splinter and crash. We were clearing the ground for something new, maybe a workshop, maybe just open grass. Matthew wiped sweat from his forehead, looking healthier and happier than he had in years. The shadows were gone. We didn't need the millions in the bank to know we were the richest men in the world. We had the sun on our backs, honest work in our hands, and a silence that finally felt like peace. Dominick's story proves something powerful. Money can buy a wedding, but it can't buy loyalty. My family told me that channels like mine never really break 1,000 subscribers because people don't have the attention span for real storytelling anymore. But I know they're wrong. I know there are people watching right now from all around the world who still value truth and justice. So here's what I need. Drop a comment below telling me exactly where in the world you're watching from. Subscribe to this channel if you want more stories like Dominic's. Hit that like button and share this with one person who needs to hear about spotting red flags, protecting your family assets, and sweet, sweet revenge.